Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Tiffany Banda, for convening this BBT, and I would like to welcome everybody BBT today. I will go straight into introducing our discussants, rather our speaker today, and then later on I will also read the bio for our discussant or respondent. So we have Dr. Halima Namakula, who's going to talk on a talk which is entitled Negotiating New Literacies in South African Higher Education Setting, a case of first-year Bachelor of Education student. Dr. Namakula is a postdoctoral research fellow with a SARChI chair in teaching and learning at the University of Johannesburg. She holds a PhD in education from the University of Witwatersrand and a Master in Education from Rhodes University. Dr. Namakula's research interests include academic literacy, support and development, access and success in higher education, gender and education, ICT in education, and early childhood development. Dr. Namakula's work highlights her commitment to advancing scholarship and contributing to the field of education. So we are going to have Dr. Namakula speak for about 30 minutes, and thereafter Dr. Ntimi will also respond. So I'll also read Dr. Ntimi's bio just now so that afterwards he could just get in and respond. Dr. Mtawa is a lecturer at the School of Education, Department of Educational Foundations, Management and Lifelong Learning at the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and is also a research fellow at the Higher Education and Human Development Research Group here at the University of the Free State. He holds a PhD in education with specialization in higher education studies. His work is focused on higher education and society, public sector reforms, knowledge production, higher education and human development, education policy, leadership and management, citizenship, primary process of universities, innovation ecosystem, and education technology. Ntawa has published widely in local and international peer-reviewed journals. He's the author of one book, and he has co-edited one book. He's been involved in small and large-scale research consultancy projects within the continent of Africa and beyond. So I am pleased to welcome you both to today's BBT. Just on how we're going to move, we'll have the presenter, as I mentioned, will make a presentation for about 30 minutes, and then the discussant will also respond and take about 15 minutes. And then the remaining time will be for all of us in here to ask questions, and those also online, you can ask questions then. For those online, please feel free to type in the comment section online if you have a question, then we could read it later on. And if you're online, if you're not speaking, if you could have your mic on mute, that would be appreciated. At this point in time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Halima Namakula to go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my work. And thank you to Tiffany for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity. So can we go to the first slide? Tiffany, are you controlling the slides?
I think no, it's being controlled from the venue.
Okay.
You just tell them, yeah.
All right. So yeah. So the work that I'm presenting now is based on my PhD, and it's comes out of a chapter that it comes out of one of the chapters, and my PhD was looking at the efficacy of an embedded academic literacy support program and how this program shapes first-year B.Ed students' academic literacy practices. So the School of Education at WITS has a writing center. I thought I should give you a little bit of background, has a writing center. And in that writing center, they run a program specifically for first year students. And it focuses just on first years when they come in. So it was established in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And the idea behind the establishing of this program was the concern around the underpreparedness or the readiness of first-year students. So they decided, I think, then the then head of school, Professor Baxen, and Professor Laura Dyson decided to sort of assess their readiness for academic demands in terms of their reading and writing. So they decided to use the National Benchmark Test, which is the NBTS, the academic literacy component. And in that test, they were assessing to see where they are in terms of their readiness in how they are able to manage or how to cope with the academic demands of the university. So in 2014, they did that, and students who performed below 50% were placed in this particular program. It wasn't a force in a way, but they were sent an email to say, we see that you might be struggling with the reading and writing, and we have this program which you could join. And students had an option in a way to join and to join this program. So my research, my PhD focuses on those that group of students who had been in that program. There's been some changes because now it's offered to all students, all first-year students. So it's no longer about at-risk students, but every student, with an assumption that all students struggle when they come into a university in terms of academic reading and writing. And we know that, Bourdieu talks about academic language not being, we can still stay on the context. We don't have to go, academic language is no one's mother tongue. So those were the reason behind it. So when they tested, they found out that students struggled with vocabulary, they struggled with reading, they didn't know how to annotate, to identify a topic sentence, and what are the claim evidence to support your topic sentence, so such things. And then this program was born out of that to support them and also enable them develop their understanding of how to read and write academically. So the focus of this presentation is on how students navigated and negotiated these new literacies. And I must say that students don't come into the university not knowing how to write and read. They have that basic understanding of reading and writing. But because it's a university setting, it's a different way of reading, a different way of writing. You can't just write for the sake of writing, but you need to back up your claims. You need to make an argument. Your argument has to be coherent. Your paragraph, each paragraph has to have a topic sentence. So such things were foreign to this group of students. And that's why they were placed in this program. So that transition from their school literacies to university literacies, there was a bit of a tension between what they know and what they expected or what they found at the university. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this disconnect that I'm talking about, often first-year students experience it, that these are unfamiliar kind of practices that are expected. They are expected to know them. So that's the whole reason why we're having writing centers, the whole reason we're having these kind of programs where we are having such interventions to help students get familiar with the way university works in terms of academic writing, and how do you go about reading an academic article, and how do you go about extracting information from that academic article, and then you use it in your own writing. And this sometimes leads to feelings of discomfort, where students lack the ability to interpret and produce, the right, for the lack of a better word, the right academic assignment. And it requires them to go beyond, the traditional reading and writing. It's not just reading and writing, but you have to go beyond that. How do you select the right information for your assignment? How do you make quotations? Are the quotations relevant? How do you cite? How do you reference? All the writing conventions that are required. So that disconnecting what they know and what they're expected to know or what they find in the university sort of creates discomfort, the feeling of discomfort and unfamiliarity. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the major thing or issue, and I think perhaps most of you have heard about it, is not something that is new, has been underpreparedness. And it comes in, it's a broader term, it covers underprepared in terms of, you know, being a university student generally, how to socialize and find other people, but also underpreparedness in terms of engaging with academic discourses. So partly because of the schooling system, that reflects that is unable to produce students who are adequately prepared for higher education. And often you find that students who are struggling are mainly English second or third language speakers. And yes, we understand that all first years struggle when they come in, but students who are not proficient in the language of teaching and learning, which is often English, struggle more because they have limited exposure to the language and also their academic practices. So this affects their academic engagement and with the subject discourses or academic discourses. So this underpreparedness is the biggest issue that universities have been grappling with for the longest time. And calling for the introduction or establishment of more interventions that would enable students to not just gain access to education, but also epistemological access, and hopefully they succeed and graduate on time. Can we go to the next slide? I hope I'm not too fast. So we also continue into the mismatch, which I think I've already covered a bit. You know, high school education often we know that doesn't prepare them adequately for the demands. So when your students enter into university, this limited exposure in terms of in academic discourses and convention make students to struggle to meet the higher education expectations. And the coordinator in the quote below talks about it's a new genre, it's a new type of writing and new set of practices that and cultural practices that you cannot just write with generalization. So it's a different way of writing an essay, for example. You can't just write an essay with and I've mentioned that students have a basic understanding of how an essay should look like. So they know that it should have an introduction, it should have a body, it should have a conclusion. But the challenge is that they struggle with understanding how does an introduction look like and what is supposed to go into in an introduction. And how does the body, what are you supposed to include in each paragraph? So if you're talking about a topic sentence, what is a topic sentence? And how do I find a topic sentence? Where do I get the information? If you're talking about evidence, then what are you talking about in terms of evidence? How do I go about finding the evidence that is supporting my topic sentence or the claim that I'm making? So those kind of conventions or the way of writing is very different. Whereas students talk about in high school, you can just cut and paste and you'll be fine. No one would question whether this makes sense or not. So that is where the mismatch is coming in. Thank you. Can we go to the next one? So I thought in my PhD, I used a different theoretical framework. I used Margaret Asher's social realism in understanding how this particular program enables the students to acquire academic literacy. And the question I was asking, if it does, how does it do it? How does the program do that? What kind of activities or what kind of pedagogical practices are happening in this particular program that either enable them or constrain them in terms of in terms of acquiring academic literacy practices? So for the paper, I wanted to do something different, to draw on a different theoretical framework. So I thought Bourdieu's theory of field, habitus, and capital were sort of appropriate in terms of describing how the university as a field or social space has its own rules and norms and practices, and in this study, academic field of higher education has its unique expectations. What when the student comes in, for example, in the School of Education at WITS, they are handed this big reading course pack. It has all the readings for the semester and all the tutorial activities. So students are expected to actually engage with those readings in their tutorials, in their lectures, and when they are given an assignment, there is an expectation that at least they should be able to draw or at least engage with those readings into the assignment, and it should reflect. And in the assessment, you could actually see how they get to be assessed in terms of their engaging with the readings and all those things. I thought Habitas would look at students' dispositions that is shaped by their previous experiences, which is deeply ingrained, their skills that they possess as a result of life experiences or schooling experiences. And then the capitals is the necessary skills or practices or cultural knowledge. So their knowledge of writing and their knowledge of reading. And for me, what this framework was doing for me in this paper is to help me understand these social practices in specific context, which is the field, and to examine how these students navigate and succeed in different fields using their habitats and the resources that they come with or they bring into the university. Thank you. So when we look at the student habitats or their background, it does influence how they navigate the academic field. So for example, when the students before they were given before they were given an assignment, their first assignment, and they drew on their experiences or on what they've learned in their high school. And that influenced or shaped how they approached the assignment and how they went about reading for it and how they went about writing it. And they talk about how they were challenged with this because they didn't know when they got their marks and they got 40% or 30%, and they were surprised that, this is the mark they got, yet that wasn't the case in high school. So that kind of, their habitus and their ability to adjust to the university level of research became sort of an emotional challenge for them. So they struggled with that, to see that they thought they knew how to write, but then here they are, 30% or 20% in an essay. So, and then being asked to come and to enroll in the intervention program. So the university as a distinct field requires specific academic literacy practices. So this field shapes the habitats by either reinforcing or challenging a student's pre-existing disposition. So we see their disposition that they come with or what they inhibit being challenged by these new practices of how you need to write an essay, not just writing the introduction, body, and conclusion, but they need to be a coherence, they need to be an argument flowing through your assignment. You need to draw on different readings to make sense of what you're reading and to make sure that your assignment actually makes sense. So in this paper or in the PhD, I see that students' pre-existing experiences sort of were a bit distorted. So what they knew is not what was expected or what they found is required in the university setting. And within a university, we know that there are certain, or universities expect you to be a particular student when you enroll. So you're enrolled with an assumption that when you got this mark, you're able to cope or you can do what is expected of you. Thank you. Can we go on? So the research methodology was a qualitative approach, and participants were purposively selected. These were students in the program, like I explained in the beginning, and they were included peer tutors because they facilitated the students or their facilitators, and they are more knowledgeable about the course that they are more not about academic literacy. I think one thing that I failed to mention at the beginning is that the program is embedded within a core course in education studies. So it's compulsory for all students. So what the coordinator and the lecturers and the peer tutors do for this course is that they sit down and for each week plan on what kind of content or concepts does the lecturer want the students to understand and acquire. So the whole academic literacy activities is designed around that particular lecture. So for every week, they would sit down and go through the content with the lecturer, and the lecturer would advise them that these are the key concepts that I want the students to understand. So the coordinator and the peer tutors would design academic literacy activities and any other activity that is needed for students to understand. So when they are talking about how do you create an argument, they are using the content from the lecture to structure that. Or how do we go about reading? If the session is about reading, they will structure the reading, how do you go about reading an academic journal using the actual articles made available by the lecturers. So that's how it is structured. So the data was through individual and focus group interviews. And for the PhD, for the paper, I didn't include the observations, but for the PhD, I had some observations when group sessions were taking place. So I would observe different group sessions with the peer tutors. So it would be like 6 or 7 students within a group, and see what kind of activities and how students are engaging and what kind of questions they're asking, and how they go about interacting with each other, but also how they go about interacting with the peer tutors, etc. Thank you. So one of the major findings that came out, which shouldn't be a surprise, is the issue of English. And we cannot talk about academic literacy without talking about English as a language of teaching and learning. That still, for those who are not proficient in the language, they struggle to understand how to go about or to approach writing or to write. It's a challenge for them. And students talk about in these quotes. For example, one of them talks about it was a challenge. It was challenging because if you're not raised speaking English, it is very hard to construct a sentence or something that is very written, like in your own words. So we have teachers who do not know English, or so it becomes hard when we come here where only English is used. I come from a rural area, so we spoke isiZulu. Another disadvantage is that in rural areas, they sympathize with us and teach us in isiZulu. So students are talking about English as a language that still constrains them in terms, not because they don't understand the content, but how they get you, how it challenges them in terms of them being able to write a sentence that makes sense, and also engage with how do you draw on different articles or academic articles that are provided for you to make sense of what you're writing. Can we go next? So the other biggest issue was how to navigate reading, academic reading. So students struggled with for starters, the volume of the reading itself was a lot, because I wish I had, I would show you how big it is. It's very big for a first year student to read. And then you talk about the vocabulary. This is a new course. It's education studies, which is understandable why they're talking about the challenges with vocabularies in this text. And then, that lack of familiarity with the language itself, because it focused, education studies one would look at your philosophy of education, your psychology of education, and sociology of education. So those are really new courses to the students. So it's understandable when they encounter the challenge in terms of understanding this, what some of them call big words, and the new words that they encounter. And given that they struggle with the reading itself, so this becomes a challenge. So some of them will talk about some of the things we are encountering here, they were not taught at school, like the issue of reading. We're not taught, and some of us are not used to reading because it's not reinforced at school. So like in the first block, I did not read my course back that much. I was just scanning. So I realized that when it comes to writing an essay, I did not have that much information. So they acknowledge that, they understand that, but one of the biggest issues was that the information is too much. And there's an expectation in assignment that you're not going to draw on just one article, but you will have to engage at least 2, 3, or 5 articles for you to get at least a higher mark. Can we go to the next slide? So we remember when one of the students said that you cannot write without reading. This was also the issue. So students also talked about the challenge of, difficulty in understanding and adhering to writing conventions. So it's not just referencing itself. How do you avoid plagiarism and all those things? But how do you build an argument in your assignment? So it's not just writing different component of assignment, that you have an introduction and a body and a conclusion. There has to be logic, it has to make sense, it has to be coherent, but also your argument has to come through in your assignment. And how to organize the ideas and maintaining or providing evidence. So it's not just saying that Piaget talks about learning as a social construction. No, you need to support the claims that you're making. Can't just write it. So one student would say, at first I did not know the argumentative essay, the one that you write a statement and support it with the facts. Let's say the argumentative essay here at the university is different from what we used to at school. In secondary, when you write an argumentative essay, it's either you disagree with that, but then you need to agree. After agreeing, you have to state some important points. So these students is talking about, you can't just write an essay for the sake of writing. You have to support your claims. You have to show evidence that what you're claiming is true in a way. Can we go to the next? So I also sought some insights from peer tutors, because like I mentioned, these have been working, or they work with the students directly. So they have an understanding of how students struggle or navigate through these new academic literacy practices that they encounter. And most of them talk about the reading, the course material that I've talked about, the size of it, which is way bigger, and there's an expectation of them to go through at least those readings. But they mentioned the issue of reading as being one of the problems that students struggle with. And they talk about a whole lot of things, but because of time and presentation, I didn't want to go through this. But reading as a barrier, because if they can't read, then they won't be able to write. So one other thing that students decided to, that showed a little bit of their ages, is that if they found the course pack too big for them to read, they would go use YouTube. So they'll go on YouTube and find those key concepts if they're in the assignment, and listen to the YouTube and use that, to write the assignment. So that's one of them, what they use. And also most of them, if you look at the assignments, because I had to look at the assignment for my PhD, is that they drew on, there are these particular websites, I think it's stadio.com or something like that, which they go to and get information. And because some of the content is a bit simplified than what is in the academic papers. So instead of struggling with understanding some of the vocab in the academic journals, they'll go to YouTube, they'll go to Wikipedia, they'll try to use, I think it's stadio.com. It's a website that they write in a very simpler English, not complicated, use everyday examples that students can actually understand and relate to. Thank you. Next.
Sorry, Dr. Namakula, you have about 5 minutes more.
No, I'm concluding now. So my question was, so what? Why are we looking at, negotiating, students negotiating this new literacy? What do we want to achieve? And this is a question that is always asked. So what if you've done your study? So my aim is that we should try, and I think universities are trying. In particular, I think universities are trying in terms of establishing targeted intervention and support programs that are specifically needed to support reading, which I feel, in my view, has been neglected. So the focus in my understanding, has been more on writing. And if you look at some of the writing center, the focus is always on how do we get the students to write an assignment, less focus on the reading itself, which is key in for students to be able to write. And we see from the student themselves acknowledging that if they are not reading, then they won't be able to write. So more institutional support program to address the linguistic and literacy disparities. So this mismatch or that is happening. But also I think we need to start thinking about how do we draw on students' linguistic diversities that they come with into, if we are making claims that we are diverse and we have these nice policies in terms of, you know, language policies that allows other languages to come into, then we should be able to use those languages. And the pedagogical approaches that should scaffold students' reading and writing experiences. So I like the fact that I might be a bit biased in a way. I'm talking about the Wits School of Education Writing Center, is that the way they structure to enable students engage in the reading and writing and scaffold them in, this is how you identify topic centers and this is how you go about looking for evidence, and this is, you know, it does help them, or it helps students to understand what is required of them in terms of reading. And then creating an environment that acknowledges students' emotional well-being, because when students were selected, the reason why I put that there, the students were selected to enroll in this program, some sort of feeling that they failed, that they were failures, that they, you know, and given their assumption that they came from they were admitted at Wits as students who had passed with higher marks, and then they arrive at the university and they are told that you underperformed. So that had an emotional toll on them, and they felt othered in a way, because here you are, your friends are not invited to this program, but you are invited. So they felt isolated and othered in the process. Thank you. I think I'm on time.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much. All right, thank you. I think we can give a hand.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. We'll just move on to Dr. Tawa. He will respond, and then after, I think people have questions they will ask.
All right.
Tawa.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It's good to be back home, though virtually. It's good to see some old faces and new faces. Unfortunately, I hope you guys can hear me clearly. I missed a bit part of the talk. I had some glitches with my settings here, but eventually I managed to address. You know, engaging Tiffany to say, Tiffany, I might miss a big chunk of the talk, but I was able to catch up. Thank you so much, Dr. for the talk and for the interesting Dr. Halima for interesting talk on the transition from a new literacy point of view, which very much ties very much with the issue of language and also background, the quanti kind of background of our students as well, which speaks so much about the ability to navigate the complexities of, you know, entering the university and confronting the challenges of language and also capacity to write and read. When I was listening to you, I was trying to reflect on the study which we have embarked on use of language and capability formation in the agents, which started recently, and you know how, you know, first years when they enter university struggle to transition from different elements, but you bring in this a new literacy, which for me is interesting to, you know, because that's a crux of, that's where the crux of, you know, the learning process or is or takes place. Of one is ability to write, but also to read, and especially in the new language of university, which is very different from secondary school. And I wanted to get a more sense of, you know, the characterization of the group you're talking about, in terms of, what's their characteristics, where do they come from, so that we begin to get a sense of, does their background also play a role in this, their capacity to navigate, or ability or inability to navigate the challenges of transition to university, and especially from this, the new literacy point of view. So that for me was something which I wanted to get more. Where does this student come from? Perhaps you might have done it at the beginning because I missed the first part. I don't know, but I would have loved to hear this B.Ed student, first year student. Are they coming from this quantile 1, 2, and their background in terms of literacy? How does it look like? That would have helped us to begin to know that characterization would have helped. But secondly, the concept of habitus and capital are critical here, because the set of preference, the disposition of student, that cognitive schemata, that's it become very critical in terms of what's the disposition here. That's where the habitus language help us to begin to understand those nuances. The perception or the conception, the action behind those navigational, strategies, or if you may like, the navigational capacities to do that. I think that the habitus, I would have loved to hear more, the utilization of this concept of habitus in this context, because that would have helped us to begin to question or to, to converge with what this group is telling us, because you have some very interesting quotation, but I would have loved to see conceptually or theoretically, how do we then unpack, those voices, say from habitus point of view. But again, from capital, capital point of view, I wondered what kind of capital are we talking about here? You started talking about the presence of writing center, the support. What kind of capital are we getting here? And if it is peer capital, is it more of institutional social capital which is created to help them to navigate? And how does it look like? Does it help them to do that? So I would have loved to hear more of that. But overall, and I do agree with you that we haven't really paid so much attention from pedagogical point of view or pedagogical arrangement in terms of how first year students struggle to navigate, because secondary school, the literacy level or the kind of literacy that they engage with is very different from higher education. But we haven't really given so much attention to pedagogically to create space or to create an enabling environment for first year students to begin to learn the tricks and the nitty-gritties of navigating that space of higher learning or higher education from reading and writing point of view. So I totally agree with you, but I would have liked to hear more about when you started talking about the so what, perhaps over time, the so what element becomes important here, to say, okay, this is a situation, and this is how these students feel about the literacy the literacy complexities of university. But then so what do we do here? Is it enough to just say we need to rethink our pedagogical and language of instruction? I think we need to go beyond that, because we don't have much time at university level. Students don't have much time. It's only a few semesters that are out of the system. So I think this has to go beyond, the practice. It has to touch on the policy on the ground, is at the lower level. What do we do in terms of preparing these students before they come to university, so that they have the language, the know-how of, the writing and the reading? Because I can give example of Tanzanian context. I teach at master's level, and these are master's students. You expect so much from them, and sometimes I had to lower my expectations, because I put my standard was so high, and I got disappointed. Just simple to write a small, argumentation is a problem at master's level. So you can imagine, that says a lot about the entire system and the preparation thereof. So I would have also wanted to hear more about, beyond this pedagogical language, what else, should we be thinking of doing to help these students when they enter university? At least they have the, the know-how, the capacity to navigate this demand of writing and writing. So basically, I would say this was interesting, but I think we have it give us it kind of provoke us to think different about, the things that we take for granted, especially for our first year student when they enter university. We don't really pay so much attention. We just give them a task. Oh no. And in other contexts, you have, let's say, 1,000 students, you're teaching 400, 500. How are you going to navigate or to manage that kind of, number to be able to enable them to learn or to develop the, reading and writing, all that new literacy that we're talking about. So thank you so much, Halima, and thank you for the group for the invitation. It's good to be back. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. At this point, Dr. Namakula, would you like to maybe respond to what Dr. Mtawa has discussed, or just maybe quickly so that we could have people also in the room and online to ask that questions?
Yeah, so I think I would respond to the first one where he mentions around the kind of students. They were all students mainly from rural areas and township schools, and they were Black students. So I didn't ask or go into details of what kind of schools they came from. So I don't know whether it's quintile 1 or quintile 2, so I'm not sure about that. But they are students who are from township schools have been taught in different languages. So I had students who are Venda but taught in the language of teaching at school was English and isiZulu. So you see, there's also that kind of mismatch that they encounter. They are not taught in their own language or mother tongue, but taught in a different language. So you find that they are English second or third language speakers. So that is where the struggle also comes in. I don't know if he managed to read the paper because I sent him the full paper. It hasn't been published yet. So, but I think I engaged with the concept of habitus and capital in the paper itself. So, but I'm looking at the linguistic capital per se. What are the linguistic capitals that they come with into the university, and how do they use those linguistic capitals to navigate these new literacies that they encounter? So the so what aspect, I do agree with you, and I think that's something I need to take note of. So if I given a chance that the paper is going to be published, I think that's something I need to look into and focus more on beyond the pedagogical practices. What do we do for schools? Because my understanding is that schools do tend to teach students for passing, for exams. So the time constraints that teachers have in terms of preparing them for exam, they focus more on making sure that they get the key ideas or key points on how to write because they need to pass an exam or something like that. So maybe that is something that universities and schools need to look into and see how they can work together to enable the students to acquire such skills. But we also have to look at the teachers themselves, because we can't just say universities are going to work with the schools. We need to look at the teachers who are teaching, because we know that some teachers struggle with the teaching itself. So you might know the content, but how do you teach something that you yourself don't know how, to write or to read academically or something like that. So we need to look into that. Thank you. I don't know if I've answered that.
All right, thank you. At this point, we'll open the floor for questions in the room, and also if you're online, you could drop a message. Yes, so any questions that you might have for Dr. Namakula, so that we have the conversation right here. No, not afterwards. Yes, Chris.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Doc, for your presentation. I just wanted to check, you mentioned that you purposely selected your participants, right? But yes. You mentioned the issues that they were Black students. So I just wanted to check in terms of that issue of race, was it that Black in the sense that there were no white who were in this class, or only the white, only the Black students are the ones who volunteered to take part in your study? Especially in terms of them understanding or having an issue, understanding the literacy practices for English as a second language for teaching.
So that's something I didn't check in terms of the PhD, because I didn't have all the data. I only concentrated on students who were already in the program. So I'm not sure if there were white students. And because it was in the beginning, it still is a voluntary thing where you can decide whether you want to come in or not. So what the coordinator would do is to send you an email to say, this is what happened in your test, you scored below 50%. So we have this program that would help you learn how to read and write academically. So if you're interested, you can come. And I asked her the question, and she said the reason why she decided to make it voluntary, because she didn't want students to feel like they were singled out, or to feel like they were singled out as failures or something like that, which later on actually students talk about, that when they got an email, they felt like they were being told they are not good enough for VITS. So I don't have all I didn't get a chance to actually ask whether there were white students who had underperformed and would be able to join. But I'm thinking, because of this voluntary aspect of the program, that you could come if you want. If you don't want, then it's okay. And I'm sure there are many of them who underperformed or performed below 50%, who decided they're not going to join the program. So I focused only on those who were already in the program. And yes, thank you. I don't know if I've answered you.
All right, thank you. I think we have 3 hands up. I think we'll hear from Professor Mika, and then Fellow, and then we could have Dr. Galon.
Okay. Thank you, Halima, for your presentation. I was curious about a bit more information that can offer context about your research participants. I think Chris's question alludes to that, and Timi's comments also allude to this. So a Bachelor of Education program is very broad. There are huge differences between whether you're majoring in junior, intermediate, or senior phase teaching. It also makes a difference in terms of the majors that you take, whether it's a single or a double major. And I imagine if you're studying a combination of English and history, it would be significantly different to majoring in life sciences or biology. And these are details that we didn't get to hear from you. So I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. And then one of the concerns I have about these kind of studies is that although you've tried to tell us so what, one is still left sort of thinking, what's new about this that we don't already know? I think every time the PEARLS results come out, it's I forget what the acronym stands for. So it's the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study. Almost every time when the results come out, the consensus or the results show that reading for literacy and understanding in South Africa is comparatively low. I think the last time I read these results, they were talking about grade 4 learners not being able to read for basic comprehension. So it's a long-standing fact that reading for comprehension is a struggle, and that it's exacerbated by low income, rurality, and so on. And so I found myself wondering what's new about the way that you're looking at this problem, and what's new in terms of what you found. And I'm really struggling to get the novelty, which obviously is particularly important for a PhD. And then when you were talking about using Archer for the thesis and then using Bordeaux for this presentation, I was left wondering, if you could justify a little bit more the complexities of applying a different analytical framework to the one that was applied in the original study. And although you did say, well, there's some strengths to using Bordeaux, and you kind of outlined the concepts that you apply, you also didn't tell us what the limitations of ARCHA were. I think you said ARCHA for the original study. So I was wondering if you could make that justification a little bit clearer, and then talk about the complexities and the limitations of imposing a different analytical or theoretical or conceptual framework in a paper where the data was originally collected and interpreted from a different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may respond to Prof, I didn't specify. The focus was because the program is embedded within education studies, which compulsory. So I didn't go into the details of identifying or classifying students, which major they take, or their methodology of teaching and all those things. So I focused only on that particular group and why they're in the support program. So I wasn't focusing on the major or the kind of subjects they're taking. I think that could be one of the limitations, that we're not looking into the different subjects or courses, or if they are science students or doing a B.Ed in science or doing a B.Ed focusing on history. So that is something I didn't focus on. So to be honest with you, Prof, I also struggle with the so what aspect of things, and I'm going to be honest with you in terms of, like you said, we've had a whole lot about reading and why it's a big thing and so on. I think it's something I need to sit with myself and think about what is new that I'm presenting that is different from what is already in the paper and also in the literature. I think for the theory, I wanted something new in a way, so I don't know if that is good enough justification. I needed to use a different theoretical framework to what I had already used in a thesis. So I don't know if that is good enough. The limitation of using a theory is like you're imposing in a way, because the data, like you said, is already collected using a different lens, and here you are using a different lens to sort of understand what is coming up. So as I was reading through that chapter, I thought Bourdieu's concept of field and habitus would be appropriate in terms of analyzing and understanding what is coming out. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for a wonderful presentation. I'm also interested to know where the students come from. But from your presentation, I could hear students who actually come from township and rural schools. Yes. But it would be good for you to make some emphasis on that. And again, I would also maybe advise, it's such an interesting study, I would also advise maybe you consider doing a comparative study, particularly in universities that has a historically black institution and a historically white institution. To make an example, University of Northwest has a mixture of two. I think 3 campuses, the one in Mafikeng and the one in Potchefstroom. And University of the Free State also has a campus and also the one in Fontaine. And the reason why I'm saying this, I had friends who came to University of the Free State, Fontaine campus, but they struggled for about 2 years. And after 2 years, they dropped out. After a year, they actually relocated to Kwakwa campus. I'm talking about students who are studying BCom accounting. But when they arrived in Kwakwa campus, they accept, Then I think this issue has, yes, aspect of language, but I think it also has aspect of relationship, where students, they become more comfortable and they can have established more interpersonal relationships with, lecturers in Kwakwa, because those lecturers are lecturers who can actually express themselves in their home languages, contrary to when they are in a historically white institution. Because when we arrive here, I'm also from a public, school. When we arrive here, we become intimidated by the environment, by the time we enter the university. When we hear students, expressing themselves in English. But when you go to Kwakwa, you feel at home, you understand? Because you can even ask complicated, content-specific challenges of your module in a language that you're comfortable in, And I'm talking about the students who are today are chartered accountants, but they were in, universities that made more emphasis on English. They struggled. But when they went to Kwakwa University, they started to excel. Then I don't think language is the main issue, but I think it has elements of environment and elements of you having, interpersonal relationships with your lecturer and being able to can express yourself in a language that you are comfortable with.
Yeah. So I think I do agree with you on that point in terms of being comfortable and expressing yourself in the language that you understand. And I think the beauty of having peer tutors in Writing Center has been an advantage because peer tutors are able to speak the language that students understand. So informally, because English is the medium of instruction, but if you observe within these groups in the Writing Center at Wits School of Education, they tend to speak to them and in the language that they understand. And actually students have a lot to say. They understand the content, but the challenge, as they also talk about, as you see them pointing out, English being a constraint to them, and because they're in a setting with a student, with someone who is also a student going through similar challenges, they are comfortable and they are able to engage in the discussion of what is going on. In speak in the language that they understand and be able to share ideas. So I think that's one of the plus that has been in the Writing Center for them being able to use peer tutors who are same student, they're students, so they understand the challenges of being a student. So this helps in a way. So they look up to them and they are able to freely speak in the language that they understand and share their ideas and contribute to the discussion of the discourses that is going on within the group settings. So I agree with you on that.
All right. Okay. Yes, please. Yeah, thank you, Halima, for a nice presentation. I've got two quick questions. One, why you decided to conduct a study only on B.Ed students? Why not law? Why not other courses? Is it because of the entry qualification of these B.Ed students? Maybe because the entry qualification to university is lower than other courses. Second question: what proxy indicators you used to measure whether these students have mastered those skills, reading and writing skills, in that particular intervention? Thank you.
So I focused on education because I was based in education campus. So it was convenience in a way. So I had access to the students. I was part of the peer tutors in the Writing Center, so it was easy access to them. The only indicator that I had was the assignment that they did. So I looked at 3 assignments. There are 3 assignments, and I would see, I would analyze the assignments to see some of the changes within the assignments. Besides their marks going up a bit, because most of them managed actually to improve in terms of their writing, and you could see their engagement with the reading pack or the articles that were provided, but also you could see an improvement in terms of their marks. So that is the indicator that I had, and plus their own, words or through interviews, they talk about what has changed. But the indicator that I can give you is that I looked at the assignment, 3 assignments, and what happened at the end of the exam. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think we're almost out of time, but if we have maybe 1 or 2 last questions so that you could just hear them, maybe quickly respond to Dr.
Yeah, I think just a follow on to that question. I think unless you tie you've got the indicator that they improved, but what did you tie it to? The fact that there was an improvement, unless you know what played a role in that improvement. So what data from your peer tutors or from the course structure or from the embeddedness was linked to understand where the improvement came from?
So, like I've mentioned, the only thing I did to see if there was an improvement is just the assignment. I didn't go beyond that. So I think I can't answer that.
All right. Thank you so much. I think we are. It's almost 1. We'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Namakula, for making your presentation. Thank you so much, and also Dr. Mtawa for your response. I'm reliably informed that Dr. Tiffany will send you views from Dr. Mtawa directly. So I think at this point, I think we can give both the speakers.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm not so sure if it's anything more. I think for those online, you're free to drop out.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes.